Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out this evening. I see the neighborhood gang is here. Nice to have you back. Thank you for coming. Yoo-hoo, right. So we're here tonight to talk about A Killer's Game, the new book by Isabella Maldonado, whose publication date was probably what, Tuesday?
Yeah, June 1st.
Oh, that's right. But she got caught up in going to New York to star at Thriller Fest, which is one of the big book conventions. So tell us a bit about Thriller Fest, because you had a pretty nifty role there.
I did. Thriller Fest is amazing. It's the premier thriller writers conference. They hold it every year in Manhattan, and so this year I did several fun things. When I was there, I got to teach a block of instruction on the killer's mind. So at Craft Fest, so I got to talk about all of the psychology behind what makes people commit murder and things like serial killers in particular. And that was one of the fun things. And another highlight is I was able to moderate a panel with some amazing authors, nobody you've ever heard of, Michael Connolly and and Charlene Harris and Brad Thor and Jack Carr and Mark Greaney and Lisa Gardner. And yes, so that was really fun to moderate that panel. It was fantastic. And Barbara gave me some excellent pointers. And so it turned out really well. So I had a great time, and then a book launch too, all at the same time.
Which is why we're here tonight, Thursday night, right? And just delighted to have a chance to launch. Well, we're doing a local launch here for Isabella.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, we're going to be talking about Agent Daniela Fargo, known as Danny. And this is a real action thriller. There's lots of interesting stuff in it. But one of the fun things in it, which we'll get to, is there's a lot of code breaking. There's a lot of pattern recognition and decrypting, and at the staggering end, which we won't discuss, a particularly interesting use, I thought. So it'll be sort of a challenge for you as the reader to see, if you don't cheat, if you can, in fact, before Danny and the team, figure out what some of the coding is. Although, to be fair, the message in the photograph is not going to be possible for the reader.
Only that one. But everything else, I wrote it so that you could try to see if you could decipher the puzzle or solve the puzzle before you turn the page over and see. But that's the only one that you can't.
I was really happy that I recognized the subject of the photograph. It was like a little test.
It was.
We did, right. But anyway, we have a very dramatic opener, which you may have cribbed from Russian agents in terms of the method. But talk to us about it, because it's very, your books are very visual.
They are. I do. I'm a visual person, and so I do tend to write that way. And I knew there was going to be a lot of world building, so I thought, I need to drop a body like right away. I know how thriller readers are. You've got to keep them going. So I thought, well, we need to do that right away. And a couple things inspired it. Actually, last year when I was in Manhattan, I knew I wanted to write something that was about the FBI in New York City. And so I wanted to focus it there. And I actually went through the entire route. So when I described this foot chase through Manhattan, it literally is exactly what happened. And then I did want to do an unusual kind of case. So yeah, I had in the opening, there is a poisoning using an umbrella as the delivery system for a poison dart. So yeah, it is kind of spycraft. It's kind of old school, but I thought, hey, it's still good. It's still really relevant. So let's do that.
Good enough for the GRU. It's good enough for you. That's what they used in, I think it was England, wasn't it? The Russian agents still, with a poisoned umbrella. It reminds me of Amelia Peabody. Do you remember the Elizabeth Peters books? Any of you familiar with those?
Yeah.
And she always carried what she called a parasol, right? And it had a razor sharp at the end, and it was a surprisingly good weapon, almost as though she had a little sword or something. So that was her weapon of choice. I loved it.
Yeah.
So modern technology, it's astonishing how you can track somebody. And this reminded me many years ago, some of you might have heard me talk about it. It was a wonderful author named Barry, whose last name temporarily escapes me, and he lives in Australia. Barry Maitland. Took me a moment. And he writes wonderful books, and they're set in London. And he started out with what looked like a traffic accident in front of the Chelsea Flower Show, where a truck runs over a person. And everybody's going, tragic auto accident and so forth. And then maybe it's not a tragic auto accident, and maybe there's a perpetrator, and the guy that they spot for this is wearing what the British call trainers, but we call tennis shoes, that had like a metallic, for lack of anything else, Nike logo. It doesn't really matter. Anyway, a flashy metallic logo. And using CCTV, which in Britain covers everything, they tracked this guy from the traffic accident through the Chelsea Flower Show, down into the underground, all the way across London, walking to wherever he lived, up the stairway, into the elevator, up into his apartment where they arrested him. And I thought that's so scary, but that's actually what you do what they are attempting to
Yeah.
do with the guy, the umbrella guy.
The umbrella man is what I call him, but actually New York City is very much like what you're
It's
describing.
becoming more and
It
more.
is. It is. I mean, in doing the research, I discovered that there's something like 15,000 cameras just in, the boroughs of Manhattan and Brooklyn and the Bronx. And I thought, I have to be able to use that, but also plausibly in order to write. I mean, because I have a background in law enforcement, all the cops out there are watching me closely and they will call me on it if I get it wrong. And so therefore I had to, if I'm going to have an assassination take place on the streets of Manhattan, I'd better account for what the police are doing about it. They're not just going to do nothing. And they have a linked-in system that's a combination of CCTVs from stores and a combination of the police department has their own. And in addition to that, there's traffic cameras and stuff. And that's why there are so many. It's not all just the police, but it's a cooperative thing. So they do have access to all kinds of things. And of course, the bad guy hops onto the subway. So then we have even more cameras that we have to get involved with on the subway. So it took a lot of thinking on my part to think, if you did kill someone, how would you get away? That right away took a lot of effort to try to figure out how he would manage to do it.
It really is. It's sort of exhausting for the reader and frustrating. But I thought it was ingenious, and I especially like the hazmat suits.
Yes, yeah, because he has to change his outfit more than once because otherwise, everybody's looking for a certain description. So he actually, he has a reversible coat and then he goes from there and then he gets into a hazmat suit, because in New York City, the other thing I discovered is that they're constantly under construction there because a lot of the buildings are very old when you think about it. I mean, Phoenix is kind of a new city. New York City, it's very old and everything's under construction. And so they have to do, asbestos remuneration and stuff like that. So they're constantly having to do that. And I thought, why not use that to my advantage as well?
Absolutely. So the assassin has obviously done this route and figured out how to thwart everybody. But in the end, facial recognition might do him in. But he's only a small part of the story.
That's it. If you think about it, when there's an exotic poisoning, something like that sounds like spycraft, this is not an ordinary murder. And that's one of the reasons why the FBI gets involved. Because if you think about it, jurisdictionally speaking, when there's a homicide in your city, it is the local police that handle the case. It's not investigated by the FBI except under very particular circumstances. So the NYPD starts out as the lead investigative agency, but then when it turns out that the guy who was killed was the chief of staff for a powerful New York senator, and it looks like the hit may have come from another country, we're not sure right away. All of a sudden, yeah, in that case, then the FBI becomes involved. I had to get her plausibly involved as well.
Right. But, one of the staples actually of investigative stories is the conflict between agencies. You'd like to think they're all working together. We're a band of brothers, like that, but it doesn't really work that way.
Mhm.
And so for a crime writer, you can actually create, because conflict is, after all, the stuff that drives your story. You can create conflict simply by having like the NYPD and the FBI,
Mhm.
butt heads. Um, but the other thing is to make this story work, they also need to share technology.
Mhm. They do, and part of what I used is the JTTF, which is the Joint Terrorism Task Force. That's a law enforcement. There are those now in every major city, but the very first one in the United States was in New York City. That was the original one, and now they're all over. They're even in Phoenix. They have branches of the JTTF. So that is an effort to try to have federal and local work together. But I mean, you brought up a really good point about that. We know for sure that the assassin was not working alone. They have to try to figure out who's really behind it. So, really, the only way they can find out is they're going to have to try to infiltrate the organization that sent this guy out there. And then the other thing I love that you mentioned conflict. So imagine this. So you're the FBI agent that helps to bring this guy in finally. And then the only way to get in there is they're going to have to partner you with him to go into the organization. That is instant conflict because you have an FBI agent partnered with a contract killer together. What
Right.
could go wrong?
Well, why is it that they think that this is not a lone actor? That this isn't just a guy with a grudge, or maybe he was screwing the guy's wife, and this was a
Mhm.
handy way to take him out without making it look like a personal murder.
They do discuss that. They actually run through, the usual reasons that somebody would get killed, and basically after they get him, they make a deal. They cut a deal with him, with the prosecutors, and kind of like if you tell us who put you up to this, we'll reduce your sentence or whatever. And so pretty much at that point, that's when they learn that yeah, there is a much larger conspiracy behind it, is when
I
they
get
learn.
that, but
Yeah.
I mean, right at the outset, or pretty much close to the outset, they decide that the guy must be like a murder for hire, that it
Mhm.
wasn't personal. Is that just because of the nature of
Mhm.
the delivery and the
Mhm.
nature of the weapon, which is a very
Mhm.
fancy poison?
Yes, really. Anyone who's been in law enforcement can tell you, I mean, you do not normally see exotic murders. There are hundreds of murders committed in New York City each year, and actually in many other big cities like that. And none of them are that complex and complicated. It was a combination of the exotic poison and also the way he got away showed extreme advanced planning. And, even like it involved calling in a fake bomb threat and then, doing all kinds of other things. And they realized this is way more advanced than your average homicide ever is.
Plus, they do discover he's flown in from Europe,
Hmm.
which sort of makes it not a domestic crime. So let's talk about, the FBI. This came up the other night in a different context. The CIA is basically the intelligence agency charged with external threats. So it's like MI6 in England. The FBI is for internal U.S. investigation, not supposed to be, going to Paris to do stuff. And so it's like MI5 for those of you who read crime novels. But in order for them to investigate terror, I mean, the definition of a terrorist attack has been expanding. It is not just foreign agents, because now we have a big field of domestic terrorism.
Hmm.
The FBI still work domestic terrorism cases
Hmm.
too.
They absolutely do. And that's part of what the JTTF is tasked with. And actually, out of the New York JTTF, there are 400 and over 450 people who work out of the New York JTTF, and they represent 61 different agencies. So that includes all the alphabet soup that you're mentioning. So sometimes it can involve situations, and in my research, I found out that there were situations that they investigated, and one of them was the USS Cole.
Oh,
They
really?
actually were involved in that, even though that was overseas. And so, in talking to the FBI, basically they explained that when there's an American that is killed, even if it, is
Oh, yeah.
overseas, they can get involved with that. They kind of, they work with others, but they do get involved. So, especially that nexus right there in New York City is such a unique and unusual
Right.
organization. That's why I wanted to use it.
Well, the FBI is under a lot of fire currently. If you're paying any attention to the news, there's, you know, so inevitably it's political. I mean, everything's political today. There's hardly anything that isn't. But I think that for them to operate increasingly, there's a lot of political controversy around them, and the CIA too, for that matter. I mean, we're learning to distrust, the agencies we set up to protect us are increasingly under question. So, but hopefully in your story, no giveaways here. They'll all be trustworthy, and they'll just be really bad guys and not, insider terrorists. So, when does the first cryptography exercise show up with the photo?
Yeah, I know, and I'm so glad. Well, I knew that you would probably notice or recognize
I
it.
thought for sure he was. Then I
Yeah.
thought, why is he in here? And I
Yeah.
was trying to make an anagram of his name, and that wasn't working out.
Good though. I'm
Yeah.
really happy. Yeah. So the first thing, if for those of you who may be fans of either spy novels or simply of puzzles or whatever, the very very first one that code that shows up is an example of steganography, and what that means is that is when they take images and they can embed them with codes. And this is something actually that's becoming increasingly done now. And because therefore you can transmit images that look completely innocent, like a scene of a mountain or a portrait of a person or what have you. And really, it is completely embedded with all kinds of secret codes. And it takes another computer to be able to decrypt it and get extract all of the code out of it. And so that's the very first one, and I put an image in there. I don't want to spoil it because I want you
No.
all to have the same fun Barbara did, but it starts in the book. You won't be able to do it on the audio book, but in the book you can see an image of an individual. Oh, look at people are looking, aren't they? That's
Right.
awesome. And see if you can, don't shout it out, but see if you
No.
can recognize who it is. And it's a little obscure, but yet it's totally apropos, isn't it?
It is definitely apropos. And also, I mean, I'm sure this is obvious, but let me just say that it's only a digital image where you can do all that. And you're right. I mean, I struggle to figure out how to deal with photos for Instagram, and
Mm-hmm.
the opportunities, especially now with AI and all the rest of it. To photos can be faked to a tremendous degree. Did any of you remember there was in Victorian times when photographs could in fact in some ways be staged? There was a famous instance where little cardboard cutouts were put, this is going to be a clue, in the bottom of a garden, and the person whose garden it was fell for the scam and thought there actually were fairies in the bottom. Remember
Oh,
that?
yes.
Fairies in the bottom of the garden. It's a clue to the nature of the photograph. Um, and so there were even fakes back when photography was, in its infancy, so to speak. But now the opportunities for digital manipulation and all the rest of it are tremendous.
Much more so. And a matter of fact, if you remember, Harry Houdini was famous for going and trying to see if there were real mediums, and there would be these
Hmm.
from the early 20th century.
Yeah.
There would be faked photographs where they would use like cotton batting to make a mist or whatever in a photograph and stuff.
Right.
So yeah, they were doing fakes back then. You're absolutely right to
But
convince people.
not nearly so sophisticated, but
No.
yeah, there we are. Actually, I mean, even think about the movies now. You can remember when Star Wars came out, we were all so just amazed by the fact that the ships could do all that. And now that's just routine.
That's true.
I
That
know.
that is
It's
true.
really, I mean, I think the whole world of, cinematography and CGIs and so forth is fascinating. Any of you watch The Call of the Wild, the Jack London, that they redid it with the dog as a computer generated dog because the rules for putting dogs into movies are so complex. You have to have at least three of them to start with, and they all have to look alike because dogs can only work for like 2 hours at a time on the set or something. No, I'm serious. So it makes a lot more sense, to have a computer generated dog.
It's funny that you mentioned about the dogs and their working. I just have to throw this in there. When I was a rookie police officer, they put us on rotating shifts. So like literally one week we would work day shift, the next week we'd work evening shift, the week after that we work midnight shift. And at the time, I was single and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have a dog? And then I realized, I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't do to a dog what my department is doing to me. And I couldn't, because I was on that stinking shift for 5 years. So I felt like people asked me, and I'm like, what was that like? I said, I felt like I had the flu for 5 years. You never feel good. And unfortunately, more than once, I did literally wake up to the sound of my tires hitting the gravel when I was driving home. That happened more than once. I never had the accident, but I'm just saying, so it is kind of funny that they have these standards for animals, but, they were perfectly fine working us to an early grave.
Right.
Yep.
So I really like Mr. Wu. Tell us about Mr. Wu, because actually there's a really great guy in this book, and he has a chance to do some pretty amazing things.
Yeah. He's, I wanted to, well, first of all, I love writing a diverse cast. I mean, that's just right out of the chute. I always do. I like writing a strong Latina lead, but I like a diverse cast in general, and especially setting this in New York City. That's a very diverse city. I mean, I go there all the time, and I love that. And I thought to myself, we have so much going on, and first of all in New York City, and second of all in law enforcement. So I decided to make the special agent in charge of the New York Terrorism Task Force, to have it be Stephen Wu. And so he's a very high-ranking FBI official. And he's like the second in command of the entire, field office there. So very responsible. But I like to give him a bit of his conflict is that he's so high ranking now that he's not out in the field anymore. And he kind of pines for the days that he was a field agent. And what I did to get there was I kind of borrowed from my own feelings about when I climbed the ranks and I became a captain on the police force. There were times I had to send other officers into danger. And it was actually harder than running into a building myself, is telling an officer, you need to go in there. I know there's gunfire, but, somebody's got to take him down. And it was easier for me as an officer to go do it than to send others in knowing that they might be killed on my orders. And I gave all of that to SAC Wu. I wanted him to have that struggle. And I kind of he had his own character arc. My main character had hers, but his journey was about, sort of reclaiming that and realizing that, he had to come to terms with it. So he had his own journey.
No, he's a great character. And then what about I'm trying to remember, is his name Flint?
Yeah, Flint. He's an NYPD homicide detective. And I needed to pay homage. He is a detective first grade, which means that he's their highest ranking detectives. There aren't that many of them. He works out of 1PP, which is One Police Plaza. So he is one of their senior detectives working out of there, and they assign him. Originally, he is given the case, and then they loop him into the task force to work with him. And I wanted to do that because that does happen. There are NYPD detectives that are working. They're assigned right there at the building is at 26 Federal Plaza, but apparently in New York, every building has to have a nickname, so they called it 26 Fed. So that is what it's like 30 Rock, but they call it 26 Fed is the name of that building.
Right. There's an insider language to living
there
in
is.
New York that you have to pay attention to. Right. So what's Danny's personal story? Because part of how she behaves in this series and all, it relates to her family history and her own sort of dynamic as a daughter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it is. It is true. So I wanted to make this again a high octane thriller, and part of my inspiration for writing this was all of the escape rooms going on. Have you all noticed that it's like all over in cities all over the world? Even there's this whole thing about escape rooms. Everybody's loving them, and so I decided, what if there was a real escape room where the stakes were life and death? And let me write about that. But then I thought to myself, okay, well, what kind of character would actually be able to survive in an escape room? Better be somebody amazing. And also, because the guy that she's forced to be partnered to go undercover with, he's a contract killer. Well, she gets trapped in an escape room with a bunch of contract killers. So I'm like, okay, so they're all trying to kill her, and she's also trying to stay undercover, and she's dealing with an escape room. Who could possibly do that? And then I realized you know what? A U.S. Army Ranger would be able to do that. And I had so much fun doing the research on that. And it turns out that the first female members of the 75th Ranger Regiment were in 2017. And they are amazing women because they do not lower the standards at all. There's no difference. And it is very few women have been able to do it, but starting in 2017 were the first ones. And then after that, there have been a few, just again, a handful of them that have been able to do this. And then starting in 2019, there's actually been some that have been in combat as Rangers. And so I thought, wouldn't it be amazing? First of all, I wanted to celebrate these amazing women who actually were able to have the grit to be able to do this. And so I thought that would be perfect. So she's a military code breaker, also a Ranger, and then she is out of that career, transitioned into the FBI. Well, at that point, when she goes into the escape room, you almost have to feel sorry for everybody else, right?
Right. Okay, so there's a lot of training that the Army provided for her. How long did she need to serve in the Army, and why didn't she stay in as a
Right.
career officer? Why was the FBI more appealing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, actually, the reason she joined the Army at 18, and the reason she did is because it was a tragedy in her own background, and you find out that it was a homicide situation. Her mother killed her father, and it was such a trauma for her, and that happened when she was 17, that she ended up joining the Army at 18. And part of the reason she did it was because her father was an Army Ranger, and she wanted to honor him, and she loved him so much and just wanted to emulate him. And that's another reason she wanted to be a Ranger. And so she did get into that. And while she was there, she did have a couple of situations. I go into it more later in the book, but there were a couple of things that make it clear that at some point she decided, you know what, she would rather work in law enforcement than be a Ranger anymore. But she did it for many years because she joined the Army at 18, and then she now is here at 28 years old. So, she did her time in the Army before she came out.
Well, yeah, she did 10 years, but at least my understanding is if you serve 20 years in the military, you get to retire with beaucoup benefits and, start a second life. So she'd stuck it out till 38. I also thought, at least it used to be back when I was young, that if you did get some, you were required to stay in for. I remember friends that went to Annapolis, for example, and West Point, and I think they had to agree to stay for, I don't even remember what the term of service was.
It used to be 4 years that you would have to,
Right,
minimum.
because,
Yep.
Because of the expense involved in sending you to school and training you, the military wanted some of that back. But isn't 20 years kind of the
Yeah,
span
usually,
for?
20 years is to get that. She spent 10 years in,
Right.
and then left for other reasons. But yeah, so she was honorably discharged and did everything she had to do. But yeah.
Well, she's hardly in a safer environment when you read this book. Should have been better off,
Yeah, right.
somewhere else. So, I know it couldn't have been that she was going to gain greater personal safety
No.
by joining the FBI. Well, unfortunately, there's not a lot more we can say without reading the book for you because it's full of surprises, and that's the the basic setup, but I don't think that we
Hmm.
should pursue. Is there anything you'd like to talk about we haven't?
Um, I guess just the idea of the fact that she's trapped, and just the idea of having to juggle all the different things, because when she goes in and she's undercover, the FBI agents do work undercover all the time, and they work under deep cover. And again, in doing the research with agents who have worked undercover, they are given tons of guidelines of what they can and can't do. And I actually spelled those out. I had like a little briefing that I had them do, a synopsis of that before they go undercover. And so it's difficult for her because she's trapped in there with a bunch of killers. And so she's the only one that has any rules to follow. And so you can imagine she's trying to solve the mystery of what really happened with this murder. She's trying to solve the mystery of what's going on. She also doesn't want to blow her cover. She's also responsible for the man who has now become her asset and therefore her responsibility. And she's trying not to get killed. And I don't know how she's going to do it without breaking every single rule they laid out for her.
Right. It's actually a terrific challenge for the author to write a book like this. You know, if you're going to set somebody up in an impossible situation, you also have to figure out how to get them out, or the whole book dies right there in the escape room along with Danny, right? So,
Yeah, there were times I felt like I was in an escape room trying to get. I'm sitting there pacing back and forth, going, "Okay, I don't know how she's going to get out of this," and But yeah, it's a. But to me, I thought the harder I could make the challenge, the more fun it would be for the readers to try to figure it out. And turns out readers have really been responding. They've been loving this book, trying to figure out, how she's going to get out of it. So I'm having a lot of fun with it.
I was okay except for the snake. But anyway, so this is something new because you have written in the past. I'm just looking it up to make sure I don't screw this up. FBI agent Nina Guerrera, you wrote 3 books: The Falcon, A Different Dawn, and The Cipher. And then Detective Veranda Cruz, you wrote Death Blow, Phoenix Burning, and Blood's Echo. So you seem to think in terms of trilogies or 3-act plays for these characters.
Mhm.
So are you now envisioning at least 1 or 2 more for Danny?
I am. That does seem to be it. And I think one of the reasons I do, and actually on that panel that I was on with all those amazing authors, they write long series, and that was one of the questions that I did put to a couple of them, is about doing that. But for me, what I do is I have a very steep character arc. So in other words, when my first book begins to when the end of the trilogy ends, my character is markedly different. She has gone through a lot of change. So that's kind of the way that I look, and I think about that from beginning all the way to the end. If I was going to write a 27 book or 30 book series, her character arc would be a lot flatter. It would take a lot longer to have any kind of change. So I think that's part of what the process is for me.
Well, I mean, a 3-act play, I mean, that's kind of a standard structure for drama,
Hmm.
and it makes perfectly good sense. You could, I mean, it is possible within a series to write a 3-act story arc and then write another
Hmm.
3-act story arc,
Hmm.
assuming that your character grows and changes, and you can do that. But you seem to like new characters. So, do you think you're always going to write women? Are they always going to be Hispanic?
No, I think that I can do all kinds of different things. It's just right now that seems to be like a Latina in law enforcement
Mm,
seems to be kind of where I am at the moment. But actually, I was talking to my publisher while I was in New York about, other possibilities. And it was a lot of fun because we actually thought of some different ideas of some completely different kind of characters. And
great.
so I think there will be something like that in the future.
Your publisher will actually be here in October, the second or third, something like that, with
Wow.
Bob Dugoni, because it's the 10th book that he has written for his most successful or
Hmm.
most visible
Yes.
character, who's a Seattle police detective.
Hmm.
So
Yep.
they're going to have a conversation.
Oh, wow, that's
So I'll send you the
fantastic.
date. Yeah,
Oh,
it'll be
yeah,
sort of
yeah.
fun to see how that goes. You can see
Maybe.
how your publisher treats other
Yeah,
authors. I'll give you a
that's right.
clue right there as to what's going on. So how about questions from the audience? Seriously, we really don't want to spoil this book for you. We might have actually told you more than you needed to know already. Anybody?
Yes.
So, since you do have other books in the works for this character,
Mm-hmm.
is there an ending, or do you have to continue on with the series to get some of that satisfaction from having an end game?
Well, actually, I'm heavily into developmental edits on the next book, and that is actually going to be published on March 26th of next year. It's already up for pre-order, and I imagine you could pre-order from the pen too. I mean, would make it, yeah, Barbara will make it happen, and this is where everybody gets my signed copies is from the pen. When people ask me where to get the signed, I always tell them this is where. So, but yeah, it even has a title. It's gonna be called A Forgotten Kill. They don't have a cover yet, so that has yet to be released. So that is already in the works, and I already know what's gonna happen next. And then it looks like there may be another one after that, so it's probably going to be another trilogy regarding that. So I'm always thinking ahead and even beyond that too. So.
But if your question is, does the plot come to an end? The plot
Oh
does.
yeah.
Yeah.
I do not believe in cliffhangers. Okay, I wasn't
Yeah.
sure that's what you
It doesn't
thank you for-
say to be continued.
No,
It's
thank you
not
for
like
clearing that
No,
up.
that
Yeah,
is what
yeah.
she was asking.
I
right.
never do cliffhangers in any of the books I've ever written. I don't like them myself. Sorry for all the authors out there who do cliffhangers, but I don't. I like to resolve, even if the characters go on and even if maybe some of their backstory goes on, the main plot points are always resolved. Yes. Anything else? Yes.
This book aside, I can always tell you've written a lot of books. But like as far as your writing style goes, do you normally like how do you go about doing it? Do you lock yourself in a room and write? Do you like having the TV on when you write?
Mhm.
Like what's your style?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No. Oh, okay. So to make sure people wanted to know what my writing style is, I wish I had a writing cave. I really do. So I do have an office area, but it's kind of an open floor plan. So it seems like there's this thing where I sit down in front of my computer and immediately everybody needs my attention. I don't know what it is, but it's like the interruptions are constant. And, so I think that is definitely an issue. But I do need peace and quiet as far as I don't do the TV, but what I do have to do is sometimes I will put headphones on and I will literally listen to like white noise, like, maybe a rain or something like that. Or sometimes I will listen to, I've actually found that they make special binaural beats for ADHD people, and I'm kind of ADHD. I mean, yes, the bright, shiny object will distract me every time. So I will listen to that to help keep me focused, but that's kind of, but the interruptions are constant. It is really a challenge. Yes. Christina. Oh, yes. Okay, so she's referring to something that's kind of fun. So she wants to know, do I wear my glasses? So a while back, I was talking about a book that I really enjoyed, and now my head's going to jump time on the name. It's a nonfiction book about, tapping into kind of your alter ego. That's it, the alter ego effect. Duhigg, I think, is the one who wrote that. But anyway, it talks about that. And so what I had gotten into the habit of doing was I put on these glasses, and that's kind of my brain's cue to get into writer mode. And I still do that quite a bit because they're also kind of blue blocking a bit. They're not the yellow ones, but they're clear, but they block a lot of that, because when you stare at the screen as much as I do during the day, it really can kind of scramble your brain a little bit after a while. So I put those on, and that's supposed to cue me to remember, okay, this is my time to focus on writing. We do not check email. We do not, look at social media. We do not do all of those other things. Except for obviously the interruptions that happen. So, yes. Oh, another one. Let's see. 7. Yes. Very good. 7. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, I think in the beginning, I was really leaning very heavily into my police background, being extremely authentic to that. And now I've sort of evolved more into the story itself. I mean, there's still a lot of police procedure in there. There's no way that I think I can avoid that, but I feel like it's evolved to where I'm willing to deviate a bit more for the sake of the story than I was comfortable doing originally, I think. Anything else? So, yes. I was a police officer for 22 years. So I started off, unlike the military where you can, go to officer candidate school and become a lieutenant. When you're on the police department, everybody starts out as a slick sleeve private, for lack of a better term. So I started out in patrol, and then from there, at various points in my career, I was an instructor at the police academy. I was a hostage negotiator. I was the department spokesperson. And I was also a precinct commander. And then my last position, I was commander of special investigations and forensics. Fairfax County. So that is inside the Beltway, if anybody's familiar with the DC area. The Fairfax County Police is actually the largest police department in the state of Virginia. Kind of like the Phoenix Police is the largest department in the state of Arizona. It's even bigger than the state police. It's the same thing in Virginia. So it's a large department, and there was a lot going on, and I feel like I was able to do a lot of different things in my career because of that. And but starting out back in the Stone Age, people really weren't sure what to do with a female police officer. But things are much better now. I do get that question now. Is it better? And yeah, it's a lot better than it used to be regarding that. Well, after 22 years, actually, I ended up going to the FBI National Academy in Quantico, and that is for the law enforcement executives. That is something where they have law enforcement executives from around the world come, and they do 3 months of embedded training right there. You live on campus at Quantico. And so when I was there, I ended up meeting a Phoenix police commander. What can I say? How did that happen? So, yeah, I don't know why it was I couldn't have, it wouldn't have been somebody in Arlington or something, but no, it has to be, all the way on the other side of the country. So I decided I would go ahead, and I took a slightly early retirement, but part of the reason was because I wanted to have a kid, and I was getting a little long in the tooth. It's like you got to either do it now or never. So, but so I came out here, and I had my son, and everything has been really terrific. He's now 14 years old, so that's how long I've been now. So I've sort of adopted Arizona as my state, and I sort of have adopted Phoenix as my hometown now. I feel like a native these days.
What moved you into writing?
Well, I always wanted to write. From the time I was really little, the first book I read that just blew my mind was A Wrinkle in Time. And that changed my life in the way of, I thought, that's such world building, such an amazing story. And I thought, if an author can do that, that's magic. I want to be able to do that. And some authors are amazing, and they're like 19 years old, and they can write a really amazing book. And it's really, that wasn't me. I mean, at that age, I was like, I don't have any stories to tell that are really, deep and heartfelt. I need more life experience under my belt. So I kind of tabled the writing until I had some life experience. And it turns out that 22 years as a cop will give you some life experience.
Well, that's really true. And we see a lot of people who served in the military are now writing. There's a, huge military fiction genre. And many of the people working in it have actually served in one branch of the service or another. So you're right. When you're young, what kind of stories can you actually tell?
Some people do it, and
know.
but it's very rare, and it's kind of funny that for me starting out, it wasn't as much accepted as far as my main character and what I was writing, but now it seems like everybody wants to write about a female cop, and I'm like, excuse me, I was doing it before it was cool.
Well, there was a giant wave called Women's Sleuth in the 1990s, and those were female private investigators. They weren't cops. And in order to actually achieve the goals of the book, they had to have some sort of an alliance, whether it was personal or familial or whatever, with an actual cop, because private eyes can't arrest people. But that was a giant thing. Sue Grafton, Sarah Paretsky, Marcia Muller, oh, they were pioneers. I used to have male authors sob on my shoulder and say they couldn't get a publisher or they couldn't get an editor to read their books because the only thing anybody wanted was the woman's sleuth thing. And then, as always happens when there's that much activity, it becomes a little jaded for readers and we move on to something else. So you may be in the women cop part of that routine now. But maybe it's also because there weren't as many female cops. And so it wouldn't have had as much authenticity.
Yeah, I like to think that I can bring some authenticity to it, and I mean I read all kinds of different books, but I also do read the crime fiction authors, and you know, sometimes I do think it would be good if they would I guess either, you know, work with or whatever women who've actually been on the job to kind of be able to give it that authenticity of knowing what it's like from that perspective to, you know, show up on the scene and have to deal with something and you've got extra baggage that other people don't have.
Right. Well, but as there are more female cops, there'll be more female cop stories, and therefore maybe more female cop books. You can't be the only one. That's
no,
being
no, I'm
really
not.
selfish.
No. There's plenty of them out there.
Right.
That's it.
Yeah.
hmm
So you represent us.
Right. Thank you. And I do. And that was another thing too. And very, very early on, I was actively discouraged. There was an agent who shall remain nameless who told me very, you know, who had seen Blood's Echo, who had seen like the manuscript of it and was like, you know, your writing is amazing. If you can just make your character not a Latina, I would be able to sell it all day long. And I'm like, no. So I, you know, stuck to my guns and it ended up being just fine. I found an agent who loves me and supports me and, you know, will go to heaven and earth and all that for me. So it's all fine. I, you know, I found the right person to represent me. But at that time, they were like, yeah, there's no market for that. And it turns out that they're wrong, very much so. And, you know, part of it is with the Cipher. Not only are they making that into a movie, but it's being published in 23 languages. It is selling around the world in every continent except Antarctica. It turns out that, you know, there's editions in, you know, Chinese and Ukrainian and Polish and Italian and Portuguese. So it turns out that it doesn't matter that it's a Latina main character. What matters is you tell a story about a compelling character that everyone can relate to on a human level, and that is what you do, and then it turns out that that character is relatable for everybody.
Fan mail saying,
Mhm.
hey, now I'm thinking of becoming a police officer.
Actually, not necessarily about being a police officer, but what touches me is I get mail from people who are like, you know, I'm struggling and this person inspires me. Because one of the themes that goes through all of my books, and Danny Vega is no different, but one of the themes that goes through all of my books is resilience in the face of adversity. That is actually, I mean, that's a story of my life. And I feel like that's the story of so many people's lives. I mean, we all have to face challenges at various points. And what defines us is what we do with those challenges. And so I write about people who, I want to celebrate people who rise to the difficulty of resilience. And I was incredibly touched. Just yesterday, someone wrote a review about this, gave it 5 stars, said it was amazing, and it was just what they needed to get through chemo. And I was like, you know, that's what I'm talking about, you know, that's the kind of thing. And then other people with the Cipher series have actually written and said they're a trauma survivor and they have faced trauma and they feel like, you know, if Nina Guerrera could get through it, they could get through it kind of thing. So as an author, And this is kind of going back to The Wrinkle in Time, where you think, maybe you're writing fiction, but you can still do something that is deeply meaningful and will help people.
I can't think of anything else to say. Seriously, is there another question? Yes, sir.
New, oh.
You were cued to do that before
No,
we
no,
came.
he really wasn't, and he's not supposed to. We're not allowed to talk about that yet. Yeah, right. Okay, so now you're gonna make me tease everyone. Okay, yes, this is my charming husband back here, who's he's a provocateur.
The Phoenix police officer.
Yeah, the Phoenix Police Commander. Yes. Okay, now you're gonna make me tease everyone. Okay, so anyway, yeah, I do have a new project. I'm not allowed to say what it is. How can I put this delicately? I really can't make too much of an announcement, but I think there will be an announcement maybe in the next couple of weeks, 3 or 4 weeks, but it's major. I signed the biggest deal of my career. It's very exciting and it's brand new. So I want to share it with you, but I can't. Just like, well, I don't know. Well, as far as that, no, well, I can tell you, you know that the Cipher has been optioned for Jennifer Lopez to star as Nina Guerrera. So that is going on for the Cipher and for the Nina Guerrera
The writer's
series.
strike is,
Yeah.
throwing everything.
Yes, it
and
has.
Unfortunately, there are a lot of projects that are put on hold that may never materialize because things move
Yeah.
on. And,
Yeah.
I very much support what the writers are asking for, but there are unintended consequences.
Always,
for
always.
A lot of people when something like that
Always.
happens. For example, the last writer's strike, we got reality TV, which led us to Donald Trump. So, I'm serious. That really is a thread that has been explored by many people. And in journalism is that, that writer's strike actually took us in that direction. I think it's going to enable AI. This is what I think is you're going to see an enormous amount more of AI as a consequence because AI is not constrained by the writers union. So, I think it's a very two-edged sword what they're doing.
We shall see. And I know that there's been a lot of talk about AI and what the unintended consequences will be. So I'm not sure how that will play out. Nobody knows. But on I guess another tease, I can say that Hollywood is calling about this book too. So we'll see if anything will develop about it. But you never know. But it is very visual, as some of you have mentioned. You can, as you're reading it, you can I can see this happening. Sure.
No, absolutely true. And New York City would be, it's a perfect place to film this particular story, as you will find out when you read it. You had a question, ma'am?
And have you started that, or it's still in the works?
Well, at this point, so first it was optioned, and then it was re-optioned, and so I am an executive producer, and I'm also a consultant, and so I can say that it is being developed. That's the word. So it's not just optioned; it's being developed. So they have attached screenwriters, but of course now, yes, writer's strike. So it's kind of come to a but one thing I really love is that Jennifer Lopez just came out with The Mother, for those of you all who saw it. I loved watching that. I was really excited in watching that because there she plays a really tough action hero, and I love it because that is the kind of book I write. I write a tough action type hero, and I'm like, I was cheering her on. I'm like, yes, this is exactly what to do, and she nailed it. I thought she did a fantastic performance.
And she's a little older than portraying the character.
Right. It's Hollywood. They can do whatever. Right. They don't need to be constrained.
There are other actresses, coming along, even as we sit here, should Jennifer fall by the wayside. It is not always the case that, the original commissioning actor winds up doing it. Any of you who watched, for example, saw The Lincoln Lawyer with Matthew McConaughey? Have any of you now watched the series with the new guy? You know, I mean, he's not Matthew McConaughey. He's a totally different actor, but I think he's very good. And, you know, for a viewer, it takes you a few minutes to kind of make the transition, you know, but once you're there.
Hmm.
So, you know, never say
Yeah.
never.
They can change the script. They can do whatever. You
Sure.
know, it's like whatever they want. No.
No.
Oh no. 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 No.
No.
Absolutely not.
No, when you sell it, it's gone.
That's right.
Right. You
That is
have to
right.
treat it according to, I think it was, Patrick, correct me, wasn't it Elmore Leonard that said, you know, he got to drive it, and when you sell it to Hollywood, it's their car, and they get to drive it, and, you know, they get the keys.
Yes.
And that's about it.
That's
yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, but being a consultant is not
Yeah. I don't have
necessarily a position of power.
I don't have veto. I don't have veto power.
No.
but I can
Actually, most of the time, the writer is like the least important person involved. No, I'm serious.
Hence the strike.
That's
right.
yeah, right.
There you go.
In part, that's absolutely true.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I love her. Oh, yeah. Yeah, she's great. I liked her on Wednesday. Yeah, I can't think of her name, but yes, I love her too.
So, you know, there's, I mean, until JLo actually appears on the screen, there are always other possibilities. So we should keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, let's give Isabella, not Jennifer,
Thank you.
a round of applause. Yay. And we certainly thank you for coming out this evening. Now, I want you to talk about the crown here for a minute
yes.
before we quit. She
Yes,
actually
indeed.
has
Oh
a
yeah,
crown.
I'm supposed to do this. Okay, so my agent, again, the fabulous one I was telling you about. I was for the first time ever. I was in Manhattan during my launch day. So she had a special launch day party for me, and then you all may have seen she had the cookies made with the book cover on them, and she also special ordered a tiara that has the title. I will put it on now. It's the tiara has the title of my book on there, and I love this story because this is like metal. It's not plastic. It's like real. It's heavy. But she called up the company that does these, and you know, she said, can you put a name on the tiara? And they said, sure. And then she said, well, you know, can you put my author's book title on the tiara? They said, oh, no, we don't do book titles, but we will do a name. And then they said, okay, what's this person's name? And she goes, A Killer's Game. This is why I love my agent. She doesn't understand the word no. She finds a way. And then, of course, the young lady on the phone is like, oh, yeah, I guess I can do that. Yes, you can do that. So now I will, you know, ceremonially put my tiara on. So here we go. I feel very fancy now. So, and it's great. It's a perfect thing to celebrate, you know, this book launch. So it's my party here.
Very handsome. Wonderful. So if you all like to get your book signed, if you could just kind of move the chairs back out of the way, and you could line up in front of Isabella here by number, if you will, and she can sign your book. You should definitely take a photo of Isabella and the
Oh, yeah, with
tiara.
the